Hey folks, it's Tom, your FrugalPrepper. So I just want to kind of talk about something that I was born with. It's a birth defect. When I was young, you couldn't understand a word that I said. Just asking somebody like, "Hey, I need a glass of water or a cup of water." It just didn't come out right, and nobody knew what I was talking about. Even my own parents had a hard time understanding what I wanted. And I kind of started to shut down after a while of speaking and kind of learned to point at things and make sounds so that I could communicate other ways as to what I wanted. And my mom was considering taking me to a speech therapist, and at one point she'd take me to a doctor, and they wanted to do some test where they filled my sinuses with saline and saw where they were leaking. And we ended up having a big snowstorm that year, and she couldn't take me, and she decided not to take me and to take me to speech therapy instead. I was born with a submucous cleft palate. And I have something called API, which I forget what it stands for, but it's where the back of your throat doesn't seal up quite right, and you lose air through your nasal cavity while you're talking. And I have a split uvula. It's just a birth defect. They think it's kind of like the same genetic defect of people that have a hair lip, but it just doesn't form all the way. My uvula in the back, you can't see it, but it's in two pieces. I don't have one uvula, I have two separate ones. So I went through years and years of speech therapy, like 10 to 12 years of speech therapy. Now, it got better. It got significantly better after the first 3 or 4 years, but I still had sounds that I could not make. When I went to speech therapy, there was not really any phonetic sound in the English language that I could speak properly. So what that means is when I talk, I have to hold my tongue in certain ways. I have to breathe in certain ways in order to make those sounds, and I have to use muscles in the back of my throat as well to make certain sounds. So I use a completely different pattern to make most of the sounds in the English language than a typical person would. So I'm sure that's frustrating for my parents, or was frustrating for them, because they're trying to be like, no, it's water. And I'm like, oh, and they're like, no, water. Wawa. That's, and so, they don't realize that I can't make that sound the same way other people do, and I have to learn to make it. And I had a whole big stack of cards with drawings on them. Like, I remember Sammy Snake. I had a really hard time with S's, and I had a really hard time with S's followed by N's. So I still have to take pauses in my speech sometimes, and what I'm doing when I pause in my speech is normally I'm moving my tongue or my muscles in a certain way that's not natural for anybody else to be able to make that specific sound. And the other thing is, air escapes through my nasal passages when I talk, and especially for certain sounds. And if I am just doing some exercise, it gets more challenging, right? If I'm just a little bit breathing hard, it gets more challenging. When I go through a severely stressful situation, like a car accident or my life's threatened in some way, all of my speech therapy will just go out the window, and I will revert back to talking like I used to talk. And I sound like I sound like a complete retard. I mean, you can't understand anything I say. And then I'll catch it like, 30 seconds later and say it again, and then people can understand me. But it requires a certain amount of effort for me to speak and to speak well. Since I've been this way my whole life, I've gotten very good at being able to talk. And I can normally do it without having to give it much thought. It's become second nature to me, right? The way I talk. But every once in a while, I still miss a syllable or something like that. And so that's when you hear, like, oh, you sound like you're out of breath, and you sound sick, and you sound this and that. It's because I don't make those sounds the same way, and air escapes through my nasal cavity when I'm speaking. And it could probably be corrected with surgery, but I'm not going to have surgery at this point now that I can pretty much talk and communicate as well as anybody else. So that's what's going on, just for the people that like to show up and troll bomb the channel, like, oh, you can't even talk, you're so fat, you can't breathe, blah, blah, blah. I don't really care. But for those that care, that's, what's going on. I was born with a birth defect and years of speech therapy, and this is really good for me to be able to talk. I am glad that my parents put all the time and effort and money into making me speak correctly. I saw my speech therapist, it's been like 20 years ago now, and she was amazed at how well I could talk. When I first came to see her, she thought, we can work with some of this, and we can probably get him to where people can understand him. But he's just always going to have a severe speech impediment, and he's always going to sound funny. And she was amazed. And that comes from practicing saying the same sounds over and over every night, over and over, and practicing, and many speech therapist visits. And what they do is they start you off with a couple of your worst sounds, and you have a bunch of cards on those, and you practice till you start to get those. They add a couple more sounds, and then they add some more sounds, and eventually, after years and years, you'll retrain yourself to make those sounds. But it was a long road, and I'm glad that I did it. And because that's when you sound funny, people assume that you're unintelligent, and that's just not the case. If somebody talks funny, it doesn't mean that they're any less intelligent than the next person. They may just have a birth defect and they can't speak right? It doesn't mean that they're not 100% there intellectually. So I'm glad my parents made that investment in time and money, and that I can speak as well as I can. That's really helped me out in my professional career and even on my YouTube, but that's what's going on. Another problem I have is when I drink too fast, I have a tendency to cough, and it comes up through my nose and it burns. So I have to drink really slow. But other than that, it really doesn't affect me much in any way today. I was told years ago by my speech therapist, don't ever have your tonsils taken out or you'll be learning how to talk all over again. I don't know if that's true, but I've never had my tonsils taken out. Even when I've had severe strep throat, and they're like, well, we need to take his tonsils out. I'm like, no, can't take them out. Gotta give me some stronger antibiotics, So, but I really don't have any problems today, thankfully. I'll talk to y'all later. This is Tom, your Frugal Prepper.